over $1 trillion in commercial real estate loans coming due. Why aren't people a little more worried?
There are rocks that haven't been turned over yet. I think this is a natural evolution.
Is there a potential upside?
In a word, it's adaptability. It's just not economically feasible to watch jobs disappear by the hundreds of thousands.
Are you coming to the office?
Hello? Who is this?
This is the debt collector speaking. You seem to owe a payment.
Sorry, can't talk right now. I'm in the middle of dinner.
If you look at those black squares on the right-hand side, rectangles, I guess.
It's me again. We really need to talk.
I'm in a work meeting. It'll have to wait. Okay. What is this payment you keep calling about?
Oh, it's just an overdue amount on that office building you own.
Listen, people are coming back to the office, but not enough. I need more time to find tenants.
That's not my problem. Just pay the bill and I go away.
Okay, fine. How much is this bill for anyway?
Just 50 million.
Really? How many zeros is that?
Hi, I'm Jill Wiltfong, Chief Marketing Officer for Korn Ferry, and this is Briefings, our deep dive into topics that corporate leaders need to care about. It sounds a little like a catastrophe in the making. Some big-name firms are requiring workers to be back full-time and making headlines for it. But occupancy data shows that huge numbers of workers still aren't coming in most days. That means, of course, that rents will sooner or later dry up for building owners who have over $1 trillion in commercial real estate loans coming due over the next 2 years. So what's at stake? Well, just about everything. If the big real estate firms can't recoup their income, then their loans can't be repaid, which then means banks could seriously struggle along with city revenues, and ultimately, the entire workforce would feel the brunt of all of that. Yet despite the possibility of doom and gloom, there are many, from real estate to Wall Street, who think there's still a way to thread the needle to a solution. It all comes down to, are you coming to the office? Before we start, if you're watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let us know your thoughts on this topic. I'm joined today by Francis Saley, Managing Principal and Founder at Mortavita, a workplace and corporate real estate consultancy. Francis has spent decades tracking the ups and downs, and there are a lot of them on the commercial real estate market. Thank you, Francis, for joining me today.
Great to be here, Jill. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Let's get right to the elephant in the room. Why isn't everybody assuming this is going to be another major financial collapse? In 2008, it was a far bigger scope, but we all remember the domino effect that a troubled market can have. Why aren't people a little more worried?
Well, it's a good question, really. And to some extent, there are rocks that haven't been turned over yet, and they're about to come. And I think the hope, of course, is that with interest rates hopefully dropping in the near term, that will help on the refinancing of some of these properties, and we can kind of muddle through it. But increasingly over time, I think people looking at the problem have sensed that even small adjustments in rates, 0.5%, 1%, aren't going to make that big a difference in terms of the overall financeability of a market which has actually increased by 5% in the last year or two.
There are, of course, some tactics that real estate firms are using to mitigate the situation. They're reevaluating their banking relationships, possibly extending debt maturities and securing further working capital. What are you seeing as the most effective countermeasures that firms are going for right now?
Well, the most effective measure is to get tenants. And that really is the biggest problem. But the bottom line is that the initial data on rollovers of leases suggests that tenants are renewing, but they're renewing for much less space, upwards of 20%. Now, 20% not being renewed, if you extended that to the entire office inventory, that's 1 billion square feet that is no longer needed. Mm-hmm. And our sense is that as technology evolves and as hybrid working evolves, that likely there will be even less actual office space needed going forward.
Well, my firm offers ninja loans. No income, no job. I just leave the income section blank if I want. Corporate doesn't care. These people just want homes, and they go with the flow.
Good for you.
Your companies don't verify.
If I write a loan on Friday afternoon, big bank is going to buy it by Monday lunch.
Yeah, same here.
That's a scene from the movie The Big Short, where two circa 2007 real estate agents give us a glimpse into the seemingly reckless residential real estate market of that period. By contrast, Francis, today we're seeing a more clear-headed approach to a potential crisis. For example, one of the world's largest commercial property firms has big plans to turn its increasingly vacant malls into mini cities, which have this mix of residential and retail space. And of course, the pace of change has been slower than anticipated. But you have said we're increasingly moving away from central business districts and more towards central living districts outside of major cities. Tell me more about that. I find that fascinating.
Well, I think this is a natural evolution of where people are wanting to be. In the past, they had to go to the downtown area to get the work done, and everything else was, came secondary to that. Today, that's not necessary. And clearly, many malls and retail properties are well located. They're easily identified, and they have very good demographics of people living around them. But retail has changed quite a bit. We have, half of retail or more is online. So what is needed now is a somewhat different retail situation. But at the same time, you can also inject other components of activities in terms of entertainment, restaurants, living, apartments, condos, those kinds of things.
Before you go, give me a prediction. Have we bottomed out? Is an average of 60% occupancy in the U.S. our new normal? Or do you think we're going to see even more dramatically declining figures in the next year or two?
Well, I think from this point forward, any change is going to be slow. It's not going to be, a 1 or 2 year wonder. My own prediction is that we will see more vacancy than in the past. So over time, remember the use case for the buildings that were built were designed around everybody coming together 5 days a week in one place. That is a dead use case. So what is being attempted today is to adapt these buildings to be more in line with what is needed now for collaboration and in-person gatherings. But oftentimes those buildings are not in the right place. It's a big commute. Who wants to come in on a commute, an hour and a half for a 1 hour meeting?
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for your insights today.
Thank you very much, Jill.
Now that we've looked at the nuts and bolts of the kerfuffle in commercial real estate, let's take a closer look at return to office itself and why companies are still having such a hard time with it. Stay with us.
Hi, and welcome to This Week in Leadership. I'm Rupak Bhattacharya, and here's a quick look at what else is happening in business.
More retirees are unretiring.
Last year's unretirement trend is being taken to a whole new level, with about 13% of retirees planning to return to work next year. Experts say that even though bringing back retirees could possibly cause disruptions to succession pipelines, retirees could also serve as mentors and coaches who help transfer crucial institutional knowledge.
How do we develop the next generation of leaders?
In a trend known as conscious unbossing, nearly 3 in 4 Gen Z workers say they'd rather be individual contributors than middle managers. Workload, stress, and work-life balance have been cited as key factors behind this, and leaders would be well advised to make management more attractive to avoid a future hole in the middle of their organizations.
Nobody is using your chatbot.
Nearly 3/4 of consumers said they didn't trust chatbots' advice and information on finance. Experts say financial firm leaders should look to address this level of mistrust as soon as possible, given the industry's current aggressiveness in deploying chatbot technology. For more insights on business and leadership, head to kornferry.com/insights. Now back to Jill and our episode.
biggest issue is that work has changed, and that does not look like it's likely to change. 3 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week. The real problem is people not coming to work. And when you have that, if you have a company where only, we got 49% occupancy as opposed to vacancy, it's not coming back.
With us now is Dan Pulver. As a Korn Ferry senior client partner in its real estate practice, over the last few years, he's been intimately involved with helping company leaders deal with empty office space. Dan, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here, Jill. Thank you for inviting me.
That last clip, Dan, was former New York real estate developer Bruce Ratner talking about how we're never going back to the way things were. And a recent survey of CEOs might agree. Only 34% of them envision employees back in the physical workplace 5 days a week in the next 3 years, which is a actually notable decrease from 62% who felt that way last year. Do they need to give up on this? Do they need to let this one go?
Yeah, I don't think that leaders should or necessarily need to give up on return to office, but I also think that we need to be focused on the future versus trying to live in the past. The physical office is going to continue to play a very critical role in enabling collaboration and engagement. But for many organizations, the idea of trying to get back to a pre-2020 arrangement is just no longer realistic or practical.
Companies have certainly tried everything, right, to draw people in. Everything from free lunches and dinners to which is the carrot, right, to the stick approach, like withholding promotions. But nothing does seem to really solve it. What can they do differently to make this in-office experience, this balance that you talk about?
Unfortunately, there's just no silver bullets here. And I think we're all aware of some very visible examples of pretty significant backlash when you just use the stick. As it relates to the carrot, a good rule of thumb that I like is that amenities and offerings are really most impactful when they offset the cost of coming to work. And that could be the economic cost. It could be the time cost, eliminating the need to make multiple stops to and from the office. And for a lot of organizations that are large enough to have the economies of scale to justify it, things like on-site healthcare and childcare can make a really big difference.
Now we're introducing artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, etc. And what that enables is the automation of automation, right? And so the people who were writing software, particularly at the lower end, unless you're doing these advanced things, they're gone. It's bad news for employment, and it's bad news for people who are disrupted.
That's investor and entrepreneur Mark Cuban with a stern warning about how AI will shift the workforce. Dan, this of course relates to real estate as well, because that could create an even more dramatic decline in occupancy rates as fewer workers are even needed for roles. Is that another factor that leaders should be preparing for in the near term, or do you think that transition is still a few years off?
Yeah, look, Gen AI is going to change how we work in ways that we are just starting to fathom. And there, I think, is going to be a variety of impacts. Job displacement for sure, but I also think there could be new job creation and increased productivity. There's also a really important role that policy plays here. And, it's just not economically or politically feasible to watch jobs disappear by the hundreds of thousands in the short term. So I think the one thing that is going to be a certainty is that reskilling has to be a part of the conversation as employees adapt and acquire new skills like data analysis, problem solving, and just general collaboration with AI.
You've also talked about how the traits of successful leaders have to drastically change, and they've had to drastically change over the past few years. But even now, 75% of leaders say their companies have not adopted best practices regarding what we're talking about here, this remote work issue. What do you think makes that top 25% of leaders who are doing it right stand out?
Yeah, in a word, it's adaptability. And I would tell you, I'm actually a little bit more skeptical of the 25% who claim that they have it all figured out. Being open to change, seeking to understand the diversity and the preferences of your workforce, those are really important skills for leaders to have. Interestingly, one of the most important developments that we've seen over the last couple of years has been the adoption of a very long-standing marketing technique in applying the idea of customer personas to the workforce. When it's done carefully and thoughtfully, it provides a really good framework for both understanding and engaging with employees in a more targeted and effective manner.
Nice. I'd like to close on a potential silver lining here. You do a lot of work in the sustainability space. Is there a potential upside here in terms of using less office space long term, meaning less energy wastage via buildings and commutes and creating more attraction for Gen Z employees, nearly half of whom have already changed or plan to change jobs or industry because of climate concerns? Is there something here that's really magical in terms of sustainability in the future there?
Well, I think it's a great place to close on. And I do think that there's a real silver lining here. So, despite the political backlash on ESG, the underlying mega trend toward decarbonization remains a theme. And, anywhere between 25 to 35% of combustion-related emissions come from construction and operations of the built environment. So there's a real opportunity to move the needle. I think the one challenge that we're going to run into is building occupancy rates can have an effect on energy consumption, but it's not a straight line. And even when occupancy is low, energy waste can still occur because you have heating and cooling systems that are still running, even with fewer people in the building, particularly with a lot of older buildings that are just less resilient and experience more of that with greater fluctuations in temperatures. But that said, there's a lot of interesting new technologies on the market that help organizations to utilize different occupancy-based control strategies, which just help them to run more efficiently and more sustainability.
Well, it makes sense that no one has really resolved it because of all the things you pointed out. It is not a black and white issue. There's a lot to consider. So thank you so much for a very enlightening conversation. Appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
The executive producer of Briefings is Jonathan Dahl. Today's episode was produced by Rupak Bhattacharya, Nadira Putri, and Teresa Allen, and it was edited by Jaron Henry McRae. It contains reporting by Russell Perlman, Ariane Cohen, and Peter Loria. Our video segment contains original artwork by Fraser Milton, Haley Kennel, Jonathan Pink, and Sasha Kotschik. Don't forget to read our magazine, available at newsstands and at kornferry.com/briefings. That's it for Korn Ferry Briefings. I'm Jill Wiltfong. See you next time.
Well, I'd say if I had a free lunch for every time I've had this question, I'd be very well fed.